Hello, everybody, and welcome to Grey History, episode 79, The Triumph of the Sans-Culottes. In the last episode, we witnessed the eruption of conflict within the Jacobin Club. Denouncing the false patriots which had corrupted the mountain, the ultraradical Hébertists launched a blistering assault on their moderate peers. But in demanding the implementation of the new constitution, the radicals had also condemned the Committee of Public Safety, with divisions emerging across ideologies and institutions. The mountain was fracturing with speed. But as news of Toulon's treason reached Paris at the start of September, the battles of the Jacobins collided with the needs and fears of the people. Insurrection was once more on the agenda, and so too was violence. In this episode, we see the last successful rising of the people of Paris. We also see the beginning of the Reign of Terror. Yet, before we commence this consequential chapter of the French Revolution, thank you to everyone who's been helping to keep this revolution on the air. I'll be releasing a show update shortly, but between now and the next episode, it would be immensely helpful if you could recommend the show to at least one other person. Also, if you'd like to help produce history that isn't black and white, please consider joining the Grey History community. From bonus episodes to ad-free listening, there's plenty of perks that come with donating a cup of coffee to keep Grey History going. There's links in the show notes and on the website, and I look forward to welcoming you personally. Speaking of personal welcomes, it's with a tremendous smile that I get to introduce the newest members of the Grey History community. A warm welcome to the newest virtuous citizens, Alexis, Jimmy, Ryan, Danny, and Colin. Another warm welcome to the newest champion of the people, Deborah. Deborah joins the amazing champions of the people, Cindy, George, William, Laura, Daniel, Monica, Joel, Adam, Tom, Eyal, Harold, David, Alistair, Carl, Jeff, Ritas, Hannah, Tyrone, Cameron, Britt, Dan, and Paul. Finally, we have the Pantheon of Greats, the heroes of the Revolution, who have recently been joined by Fernando. A huge thank you to these heroic revolutionaries: Brian, Charles, Jeff, Olga, Kevin R., Scott, Howard, Hilberto, Ron, Kevin S., and Fernando. Once again, thank you to everyone in the Grey History community. And with that, let's get into it. War on tyrants. War on aristocrats. War on speculators. So read the placards waved before the convention as the insurrectionists flooded the chamber. With news of Toulon's defection colliding with an already agitated Paris, the loss of the great Mediterranean port sparked disorders in the capital. Demanding immediate measures to save the revolution, it's often stated that these events commenced the Reign of Terror. But, in an ironic twist of fate, this insurrection was also the peak of sans-culotte power. To understand why, and the magnitude of this final success, we must first rewind the clock as the revolution turned on itself. By the end of August 1793, factionalism reigned supreme. Not only were the Girondins leading the civil wars in the departments, but the victors of 2 June had turned on themselves. The enraged fought the Jacobins fought each other, and the ultra-radicals of both the streets and the commune fought the convention and its numerous committees. Combined with hunger inflation, and military defeats, an insurrection was perhaps not a matter of if, but when. To add to these factors, we do need to note 4 key developments which occurred alongside the bitter factional struggles of the last few episodes. Unsurprisingly, the majority of these developments are tied to the Hébertists and the radicalising popular movement. Firstly, by the end of August, the issue of aristocratic officers was back in focus. We heard in the last episode how Hébert used denunciations against General Custine to attack Danton indirectly. But the pro-war Hébertists were genuine in their pursuit of noble commanders, and so, throughout the summer, the agitation continued. In late July, the French lost Mainz to the Prussians, a Rhinish town in modern-day Germany. The surrender of almost 20,000 soldiers, not to mention the gains of late 1792, enabled Hébert to pursue both Custine and his supporters. The fact that it was Custine who had originally conquered much of the Rhineland was conveniently forgotten. Eventually, Custine was tried by the Revolutionary Tribunal in late August. Found guilty of treason, he was executed on the 28th. Was he guilty? No. But for military officers, particularly those of noble pedigrees, defeat could now be deadly. Convinced that pacifists, aka secret royalists, were stifling the work of the army, Hébert continued to pursue military elites. As the rhetoric against the traitors escalated, Toulon defected to the British. For the ambitious Hébert, the treason of the French Navy had delivered him the most fortuitous of political gifts. Alongside the rising denunciations and persecutions of military elites was the pursuit of another enemy, profiteers. With inflation and shortages already gripping Paris, the situation had only deteriorated over the course of the summer. By the end of August, the relentless heat had dried the rivers. No water meant no bread, not because of a poor harvest, but rather an inability for mills to grind grain into flour. The result was an increasing shortage of food at a time when civil and foreign conflict already fueled inflation and had hampered the distribution of necessities. Unsurprisingly, the popular press reflected the hunger of the people. Denouncing the new merchant aristocracy, Hébert let it rip in his infamous Le Pierre du Chêne. The country? Fuck. The traitors have no country. As long as they thought the revolution would serve their interests, they supported it. They lent their aid to the Sans-Culottes in destroying the nobles and the old courts of law, but only in order to replace them by aristocrats. And so, since there are no longer any active citizens, since the luckless Sans-Culottes enjoy the same rights as the rich tax collector, all these men have turned their coats and are striving tooth and nail to destroy the Republic. They have bought up all food supplies in order to sell them again for their weight in gold, or else bring famine upon us. The rich only think of their interests. They are the Republic's greatest enemies. They despise the revolution because it has established liberty and equality. Fuck, we've got to finish this off. Shudder then, bastard bloodsuckers of the people. The same muscle that pickled the throne of the jackass king will fall on you. Not to be outdone, the enraged, still battling to lead the popular movement, also took to the press. Having pioneered the cries against this new blood-sucking aristocracy, activists like Théophile Leclerc denounced the spirit of moderation, which was hopeless for the public good. Instead, his solution was death. By the end of August, the want of bread was again threatening insurrection. I say again because we've already seen this situation in the preceding months. Remember, as the convention battled to contain both a hungry populace and the rising threat of the enraged, the body had reluctantly outlawed hoarding and speculation. Furthermore, the deputies had also prohibited both the practice of two prices and the exchange of paper currency for metal coins. But the convention had failed to drop the big one. For now, it was merely investigating price controls on basic necessities. However, as it did so, misery continued to increase. So too did the danger. On the 2nd of September, a Parisian section, confusingly but appropriately named the Section of the Sans-Culottes, addressed a petition to the convention. The demands of the sovereign people were anything but moderate. Calling for a purge of all former nobles, priests, and royal officials, the petitioners also demanded controls on prices, wages, and even the ownership of property. Ignoring the protections enshrined in the new Constitution of 1793, calls could be heard for aggressive economic intervention and the curtailment of property rights. Using language similar to Robespierre's earlier justifications to subordinate individual property rights to the needs of society, the sectionaries made it clear that this was the path to abundance and tranquility. Make haste, proxies of the people, to unconditionally set the price of necessary foodstuffs, the wages for work, the profits of industry and commerce. You have the duty and power to do so. What's that, you will say, for the aristocrats, the royalists, the moderates, the schemers? This is undermining property which must be sacred, inviolable. Without a doubt, but don't they know, these scoundrels, don't they know that property has no basis beyond physical need? The Republic must assure to each one the means of obtaining necessary foodstuffs. In addition to the regulation of prices and wages, the petitioners also demanded limitations on the right of property ownership. Going forward, each citizen should be limited to only one workshop, store, or farm. That the maximum of fortunes be fixed, that the same individual can possess only one maximum, that no one can lease more land than what is needed for a fixed quantity of ploughs, that the same citizen can only have one workshop, one shop. These measures will restore abundance and tranquility, gradually eliminate the inequalities of fortune that are too great, and increase the number of proprietors. Unsurprisingly, for a convention still resisting the introduction of price controls, demands to curtail the ownership of property were abhorrent. Nonetheless, the deputies were representatives of the people, and this is what the people sought. Foreseeing an eruption of anger and desperation, Danton implored the convention to act. Warning of immediate insurrection against shopkeepers and the rich, Danton called for stricter enforcement of the existing price maximum on grain. Failure to make tangible concessions would merely benefit the extremists. Yet Danton's intervention on behalf of the people's needs offers a convenient segue to the third development we must discuss. But before we get to his calls for a revolutionary army, it is worth noting that Danton was not just championing pragmatic policy. In echoing some cries for rigorous economic controls, Danton was playing politics. Having been targeted by opponents for weeks, throughout August and September, the Jacobin giant was making a point of embracing popular positions. Sure, he did not endorse all of the Sans-Culottes' demands, but he did back certain issues compatible with his personal beliefs. This vocal advocacy lent him some much-needed credibility at a time when the Hébertists were relentlessly pursuing the so-called moderates of the mountain. However, in addition to promoting the strict enforcement of price maximums on bread, Danton was also demanding a revolutionary army. This is the third key development we need to cover, and it begs the question, what was the revolutionary army? For the radicals of Paris, the nation required a new patriotic force of sans-culottes. These militarized units of dependable citizens would be deployed across the country to enforce the revolution's laws. Consequently, their mandate was simple: secure the supply of food by forcibly seizing grain from farmers, while doing so, eliminate counter-revolutionaries. By the summer of 1793, cries for such a force were becoming ever louder. After all, from the Vendée insurrectionists to the Federalist rebels, France had no shortage of internal enemies. Combined with farmers and merchants allegedly hoarding much-needed necessities, the time had come to unleash the sans-culottes. But while the ultraradical Hébertists embraced this new component of total war, the National Convention had other ideas. Technically, the body had already approved a revolutionary army, again at the behest of the popular movement. However, the deputies had conveniently forgotten this decree, and not without good reason. As Robespierre himself had once warned, no one likes armed missionaries. For some deputies, the result of releasing a bunch of hot-blooded revolutionaries across the countryside was entirely predictable. Indeed, we have already seen the revolutionary armies at work. In December 1793, Lyon was the scene of horrific mass executions by cannons. Those executions were overseen by units of a future revolutionary army. Anticipating that these sans-culotte militias may create more problems than they solved, the convention had therefore stalled the formation of any such force. But by September 1793, the revolution was continuing to spiral. As such, Hébertist demands for a revolutionary army were becoming irresistible. Finally, the fourth development worth noting also relates to Lyon. The siege of Federalist Lyon had commenced in early August, and weeks later, the traitorous rebels were still holding on. For the ultra-radicals of Paris, this was more proof of conspiracy. So long as Lyon, Marseille, Bordeaux and Toulon remained in resistance to the capital, extreme measures were entirely justifiable. The purge of aristocratic officers, the creation of the Revolutionary Army, the curtailment of property rights and aggressive controls on wages and prices. The moment required extremism. Moderation meant death. Thus, given all of these demands, and given inflation, food shortages, factional struggles, and civil and foreign wars in seemingly every corner of the country, what we have here is the perfect situation for another insurrection. With some ultra-radicals demanding a new September massacres or another 10th of August, it seemed a matter of time until unrest returned. In fact, revolt was debatably brewing before Toulon's defection. Unsurprisingly, the ringleaders of this nascent rising were the city's ultra-radicals. By the end of August, the Hébertists were marshalling their power. Described by historian Peter McPhee as virtually the political masters of Paris, the tensions of the prior weeks were reaching their climax. Already in a war of words with both moderate deputies and the convention's committees, it was time to secure their agenda with force. As commanders of the Parisian municipality, and as the emerging leaders of the popular movement, the ascendant Hébertists returned to tried and tested tactics. Like the overthrow of the monarchy and the purging of the Girondins, the ultra-revolutionaries embraced the sections and the clubs to coordinate their campaign. Given Hébert's personal involvement in the downfall of the Gironde, the prominent Jacobin knew exactly what to do. On the 28th of August, wheels were put into motion. Speaking at the Jacobin Club, Hébert proposed that the society send a delegation to the convention. The demands would be simple: purge the military of aristocratic officers, create a revolutionary army, and implement harsher policies towards suspected individuals. Critically, the capital's 48 sections and the other popular societies were invited to join the petition. Even before the proposed petition could be drafted, events soon spiralled against the embattled convention. On the next day, the 29th of August, a deputy returned from the north to report on the deteriorating military situation. That deputy was Jacques-Nicolas Billaud-Varenne. Born the son of a lawyer, Billaud-Varenne had followed his father's footsteps prior to the revolution's outbreak. Interestingly, he was once a clerk in Danton's legal office, but the politics of the two men had diverged substantially. An unrepentant radical, Billaud-Varenne had helped to plan the overthrow of the monarchy in 1792. As an elected member of the convention, he had championed the declaration of the Republic, and later he was a vocal combatant in the factional struggles with the Gironde. A dedicated member of the Jacobin Society, the committed clubbist was well in touch with the popular movement. As such, he had a knack for sensing the public mood. Most recently, it was he who had played a key role in the convention's decision to outlaw speculation and hoarding in the second half of July. Intriguingly, even more so than Hébert, it is debatably Billaud-Varenne who would profit most from the coming insurrection. Having returned from the frontiers in late August, Billaud-Varenne was enraged by the perceived inaction of the convention and its committees. With the nation continuing to suffer military defeats, the radical Montagnard agreed with the Hébertist stance that extreme measures were warranted to save the revolution. As such, he took up their line of attack. To Billaud-Varenne, it was self-evident that the reign of the committees was ineffectual. Reform was required. But, unlike Hébert, his solution was not the partial implementation of the Constitution. Instead, Billaud-Varenne sought a new commission to supervise the Committee of Public Safety and the broader operations of the executive branch. For Robespierre in particular, this was a dangerous proposition. As discussed in the last episode, Robespierre saw any weakening of the committee as an existential threat. In a time of national crisis, the weakening of the committee was akin to weakening the Republic. With Billaud-Varenne well respected amongst the Jacobins, historian Albert Merty notes the efforts undertaken by Robespierre to quell this suggestion. Like Hébert's proposal to implement the new constitution, this was no easy task. Critically, Robespierre had support from the Jacobin Old Guard. Historian Albert Merty writes, Billaud-Varenne criticised before the convention the inaction of the government and proposed to set up a commission whose duty it should be to watch over the execution of laws and send the guilty to the scaffold. In vain did Robespierre try to parry the blow which Billaud had just aimed at the Committee of Public Safety. The proposed commission would necessarily be a rival to the committee, which it would paralyse, and it would be a source of disorders and conflicts. It is to be feared, Robespierre said, that this commission will be more concerned with personal enmities than with honest supervision, and so become a regular committee of denunciation. It is not for the first time that I perceive the existence of a perfidious scheme for paralysing the Committee of Public Safety under the guise of assisting it in its labours. The Assembly was indifferent, and there were even murmurs to be heard. Danton came to the assistance of Robespierre, who had defended him at the Jacobins 3 days before. Quoting Danton, "The Committee of Public Safety is already harassing the Executive Council. If you create a commission, it will harass the committee, Perhaps instead of fresh activity, you will only create a fresh inquisition. But, having said so much, Danton, true to his usual tactics, proposed a compromise. They would do better, he said, to add 3 members to the committee. His motion was referred to the committee, which was in no hurry to submit a list of 3 members whom it desired to add to it, for it could not have avoided including Billaud-Varenne. So, although the Committee of Public Safety had been refreshed less than 2 months prior, by the start of September it was clear that additions needed to be made. Faced with calls to abolish or subordinate the Convention's principal committee, the deputies had to give ground to the empowered ultra-radical movement. However, how best to do so was a precarious matter. Inflexibility could trigger revolt, just as the Girondins had shown, but surrendering too much power to Hébertists was equally perilous. Worse still, in the days that followed, the pressure increased. The sections pushed for controls on prices, wages and property, while Hébert renewed efforts against the tyranny of the false patriots. With the radicals seemingly the masters of an agitated capital, demands could be heard from the clubs. Let terror be the order of the day. Concessions were now inevitable. It was at this most inopportune moment that shocking news hit Paris. Toulon had embraced the English. Insurrection was already probable, but now it was practically guaranteed. Ironically, news arrived from the south on the 2nd of September. This was the first anniversary of the September massacres. The parallels were numerous. Back then, Paris had slid into frenzied bloodshed because of the Prussian advance. Now it was the English. Combined with the ongoing Vendéan and Federalist rebellions and the advance of Prussia, Austria and Spain, a repeat of the chaotic September massacres was entirely possible. In fact, some ultra-radicals demanded just such a measure. With cries to ruthlessly purge the capital of all counter-revolutionaries, historian Ruth Skur sees a city completely out of control. Even before the government had confirmed Toulon's betrayal, events emboldened a new insurrection. On the same day, September the 2nd, the radical deputy Billaud-Varenne launched a blistering attack on the Committee of Public Safety. Here was further proof that the committee was impotent. Agreeing with Billaud-Varenne, Hébert wasted no time in pursuing his own agenda. In short order, a resolution was passed at the Jacobin Club. The society would unite with the sections and the popular clubs of Paris to petition the convention the following morning. This may sound innocent enough, but remember that the convention had been surrounded by an armed crowd just months prior and forced to purge the Girondins. Keen to maximise their concessions from any intransigent deputies, the Hébertists were even willing to work with those associated with the enraged. The old adage, "the enemy of my enemy is my friend," proved true, and the struggles of the previous months were momentarily paused. Knowing that yet another uprising would further discredit the convention, Robespierre worked overtime to hinder the popular movement. In addition to being a member of the embattled Committee of Public Safety, the incorruptible was currently the president of the National Convention. As such, any anarchy in the streets and any rising against the deputies would be more than just an assault on the revolutionary government. It would be a personal humiliation. Despite this, Robespierre was unsuccessful. Initially stalled by the efforts of some Montagnards, protests broke out 2 days later. On the morning of the 4th of September, a crowd assembled before the Paris Commune. Standing in front of Town Hall, the gathering was a diverse representation of Paris. Artisans rubbed shoulders with labourers, workers, and even junior staff from the government's various ministries. As ever, joining their male comrades were large cohorts of women. In fact, in an effort to magnify their pressure on the convention, the Hébertists had allied with the Society of Revolutionary Republican Women, a radical political club for female citizens. Now, to emphasise just how radical, multiple members of the club's leadership had direct connections to the enraged. Ultimately, that will be the society's downfall, but for now, the various ultra-radical camps were uniting to force their will on the convention. Yet, as diverse as this crowd appears, it had one factor in common: assignats. Everyone was paid in the revolution's paper currency, which meant everyone was suffering from its continued devaluation. With news of Toulon's treachery hardly stabilising the situation, the people had come to demand the most extreme remedies. Placing a table before Town Hall, a petition was soon drafted for the capital's municipality. Reading it to the Hébertist officials who had come outside, the petitioners declared, "Citizens, the difficulty of obtaining bread from the bakers is the reason why we have come to interrupt for a moment the most important work that occupies you. For the last 2 months, we have suffered in silence, in the hope that it would come to an end. But, on the contrary, the evil is increasing each day. We have come, therefore, to ask you to attend to the steps that public safety demands. Act so that the labourer who has worked through the day and needs to rest at night is not obliged to stay awake for part of the night and lose half his day in order to seek bread, and often without obtaining it." Demanding action to secure the people's welfare, what followed was intense negotiations between the crowd and the commune. As we will discuss in one of the 2 episode extras for this episode, historians are divided over how to interpret the events of 4 and 5 September. Most notably, is this a situation in which the Hébertists orchestrated a mass rising? Or were the so-called leaders of the popular movement really being led by their own supporters? At least on the morning of the 4th, it appears to be the latter. The truth is that we don't quite know if this crowd was a spontaneous gathering of the hungry and desperate, or one deliberately marshalled by ultra-radical agitators. If the crowd on the 4th of September was assembled to coerce the convention, this weapon of popular pressure almost exploded prematurely at Town Hall. As the Hébertist Mayor Pache tried to reassure the hungry, things did not go to plan. I don't usually give dating advice, but as I recently had to explain to a friend of mine, telling someone to just calm down is usually a bad idea. Mayor Pache was learning this the hard way. Soon on the back foot, cries were ringing for bread, and hunger was threatening a fresh outbreak of disorder. With the crowd at risk of becoming a mob, another Hébertist official, Choumet, quickly rushed back from the convention. Hoping to placate the people by delivering a long-standing demand, the representatives had promised the implementation of price controls. Asking for 1 week to finalise the details, the convention had made a major economic concession. Just hours in, and the Sans-Culottes had had their first significant victory. But one victory was insufficient, especially when counter-revolution grew stronger by the day. Soon, the crowd had turned their hostility from Mayor Pache to Choumet. Faced with either harnessing the people's anger or becoming a victim of it, Choumet managed to achieve the former. Jumping on a table, the senior municipal official made an impassioned plea. "I have been poor myself, and so I know what the life of the poor is like. We have an open war of the rich against the poor. They want to crush us. All right, we must forestall them. We must crush them ourselves, and we must have the strength to do so. The unfortunates that they are, they have devoured the fruits of our labours. They have eaten our shirts. They have drunk our sweat. And they would still like to drink our blood. I demand, first, that a quantity of flour sufficient to provide the bread needed for tomorrow be transported to the market. Second, that a decree be requested from the National Convention to immediately set up a revolutionary army with the effect of transporting itself to the countryside where wheat is in requisition, ensuring the levies, encouraging arrivals, stopping the manoeuvres of the selfish rich, and delivering them to the vengeance of the laws. With Chumet attempting to direct the crowd's anger away from Town Hall and towards the National Convention, Hébert seized his moment. Speaking immediately after Chumet's demands to petition the convention, Hébert rallied the people, perhaps indicating that the Hébertists were not in full control of the situation. Hébert also played for time. Let the people go en masse to the convention tomorrow. Let them surround it as they did on August 10 and May 31. And let them not abandon this post until the national representation has adopted the means that are appropriate to save us. Let the Revolutionary Army leave at the very moment the decree has been issued. But, above all, let the guillotine follow each section, each column of this army. Having successfully diffused a potential riot on the steps of Town Hall, the Hébertists of the municipality now turned the people on the national government. In the hours that followed, ultraradicals worked overtime to harness the popular energy for their own political aims. That evening, one section declared itself in a state of insurrection against the rich, while speakers in the clubs and sectional assemblies continued to demand extreme measures. In vain, Robespierre and others tried to stem the growing insurrection. Pleading for unity, he warned of plots to mislead the people and to weaken the authorities. In reply, voices could be heard calling for another purge of the Committee of Public Safety. For the third time in as many months, the convention was about to be surrounded. By the next day, the 5th of September, the Hébertists were ascendant. Although threatened by the crowd just the day prior, the ultra-revolutionaries had used the last 24 hours to secure their leadership of a popular insurrection. Now in a position to write and lead the petition to the convention, the radicals ensured that their agenda was presented as the people's. By the early afternoon, a large mass had surrounded the deputies of the National Convention. With no choice but to allow them inside, the crowd flooded in. Before long, armed demonstrators sat alongside representatives, while the galleries were boisterous and disorderly. Attempting to portray a sense of normality to an occasion anything but normal, the Hébertist Mayor Pache recommenced the interrupted proceedings. After some brief words, he tasked Chumet to read the people's petition. Chumet began. Citizen legislators, the citizens of Paris, tired of seeing their destinies too long floating in uncertainty, wish at least to fix them invariably. The tyrants of Europe and the domestic enemies of the state atrociously persist in their frightful system of starving the French people. To conquer it by forcing it to shamefully exchange its liberty and sovereignty for a morsel of bread. That will never happen. New lords, no less cruel, no less greedy, no less insolent than the old, have risen upon the ruins of feudalism. They have bought or leased the property of the old masters and continue to walk in the paths beaten by crime, to speculate on the public misery, to dry up the sources of plenty, and to tyrannize over the destroyers of tyranny. Another class, as greedy and criminal as the first, has seized the basic necessities. You have struck it, but you have only stunned it, and in the very shadow of the laws it continues its brigandage. Every day we learn of new betrayals, new crimes. Every day we are disturbed by the discovery and revival of new plots. Every day new troubles agitate the Republic and are ready to drag it into their stormy whirlwinds and to precipitate it into the unfathomable abyss of the centuries to come. But where is the powerful being whose terrible cry will awaken the sleeping, or rather paralyze justice, stunned by the clamours of the parties, and will force it finally to strike the criminal heads? Where is the strong being who will crush all these reptiles, which corrupt everything they touch, and whose venomous stings agitate our citizens, change their political assemblies into gladiatorial arenas, where every passion, every interest finds apologists and an army? It is time, legislators, to put an end to the impious struggle that has lasted since 1789 between the children of the nation and those who have abandoned it. Your fate and ours are linked to an invariable establishment of the Republic. We must destroy its enemies, or they must destroy us. They have thrown down the gauntlet in the midst of the people. The people are picking it up. Today, the mass of the people must crush them, without recourse, with its weight and its will. And you, mountain, forever famous in the pages of history, be the Sinai of the French. Launch amidst the thunderbolts the eternal decrees of justice and the will of the people. Unshakable amidst the heaped storms of the aristocracy, stir and shudder at the voice of the people. Long enough has the concentrated fire of love of the public good boiled in your flanks. Let it make a violent eruption. Holy mountain, become a volcano whose burning lava destroys forever the hope of the wicked. Having earlier denounced the open war of the rich against the poor, Chumet's demands were simple: food and the means to seize it. That means was none other than the Revolutionary Army. Unsatisfied with the day prior's concession to implement broad price controls, the official reiterated the need for a patriotic force. As he did so, Chumet made sure to take swipes at the convention and its Committee of Public Safety. Describing good laws as lacking what he termed executive force, Chumet was hinting at calls to reorganise the executive branch of government. Although he did not explicitly call for the implementation of the Constitution of 1793, Hébertist agitations ensured his meaning was crystal clear. Restraining himself from appeals to abolish the Committee of Public Safety, Chumet's cries for food and force soon found unexpected support. Far from fellow petitioners, this assistance was voiced by the convention's own. Sensing an opportunity to conveniently advance both his ideals and his position, the deputy B.U. Varenne returned to his earlier offensive. Not yet on the Committee of Public Safety, historian Robert Palmer describes the familiar opportunism seen on the 5th of September. Nothing could drive France further into anarchy than the proposed Revolutionary Army, a roving horde of undisciplined bullies led by inquisitors and demagogues, turned loose with guns and guillotines upon the wretched peasants, and free from any effectual control by the authorities in Paris. Members of the convention were aware of the danger, and therefore, though they had voted months ago, under pressure, that such an army should exist, they had done nothing whatever to bring it into being. Robespierre now, as presiding officer, answered Chumet with meaningless generalities, which, in the circumstances, were perhaps the best thing that anyone could have said. Even if united, the convention could hardly have resisted the demands of its invaders, and, as usual, the convention was not united. Some of its members were in league with the insurgents, as Robespierre had been 3 months before. They had little sense of the solidarity of a parliamentary body, little respect for the elections of a year ago by which members held their seats. They saw, or professed to see, the sovereign people present in the flesh beside them, and so, in allying with a mob against their colleagues in the convention, they represented themselves as the true upholders of the people's will. More than once during the past 5 years, this little drama had been played. The characters changed, but the script remained unaltered. Today, it was B.U. Varenne who played the role of Couthon on June 2. Divided and disorganised, the convention was putty for those who could seize the initiative. 2 men rose to the occasion. The first was B.U. Varenne. Calling for the extermination of the people's enemies, the radical demanded that the War Ministry immediately draft plans for the Revolutionary Army. Moreover, in addition to empowering the Hébertist-controlled ministry to craft a proposal that would no doubt aid their allies and supporters, B.U. Varenne renewed his attacks on the Committee of Public Safety. Once more, the deputy called for the creation of a new committee to supervise the government. This was a direct assault on the Committee of Public Safety. But as a few brave deputies tried to stall the measures demanded, one Jacobin re-entered the arena. Having been assaulted by the Hébertists for weeks, Danton had sought to bolster his popularity by supporting sans-culotte demands. Having advocated both for price controls and the Revolutionary Army, the crowd in the convention cheered and clapped as Danton prepared to speak. After an ovation lasting several minutes, one which no doubt reminded his rivals of his continued power, Danton backed the impulse of the people. Endorsing the immediate creation of the Revolutionary Army, he proposed that the convention decree its existence before a plan had been created. Additionally, he also proposed that the sans-culottes of Paris be paid to attend sectional meetings, and that those meetings be limited to encourage regular attendance. Taken together, the 2 measures were extremely popular. The embattled deputy had once more seized the occasion to secure the people's favour. With the Revolutionary Army promptly decreed, focus shifted elsewhere. In an era obsessed with hidden conspiracies, it landed on the Girondins. A fresh deputation soon arrived from the Jacobin Club. Backed by the sections of Paris, the petitioners demanded death for the enemy within. Delivered in various poetic metaphors, their expectation was clear. The people required the purging of the Republic. Furthermore, the delegation reiterated an increasingly popular phrase: "Make terror the order of the day." As the afternoon passed, and as the convention remained occupied with petitions and parades, a subset of the Committee of Public Safety worked tirelessly to appease the will of the people. By late afternoon, Barrère was ready to speak. Despised by the ultraradicals for prior moderation, the former independent deputy had now well and truly moved into the Jacobin column. Known for his role as being the committee's primary spokesman to the convention, Barrère reframed the day's proceedings and outlined the committee's proposals. Warning of plots against the Republic, Barrère praised the Commune for coining the phrase, "Make terror the order of the day." Declaring that the Revolutionary Army would sweep France of all conspirators, he specified its initial details and mandate. Furthermore, He also promised the blood of all counter-revolutionaries, in particular the Brissot's and the Marie Antoinettes. To make good on this promise, the committee proposed that the Girondins would be immediately brought to trial. The people were pleased. So ended the rising of the 4th and 5th of September, the triumph of the Sans-Culottes. Over the course of 2 days, price controls had been promised, the Revolutionary Army had been decreed, the Girondins were scheduled for trial, and a host of smaller measures had fortified the one and indivisible Republic. And yet, in this great victory for the popular movement, there is no shortage of irony. For amongst their many successes, the people had secured their downfall. With these measures, and those that would follow shortly, we see the high watermark of sans-culotte power. In many ways, September 5 was the beginning of the end of the People's Revolution. But, more importantly, it was also the beginning of the Terror. Thank you for listening to episode 79, The Triumph of the Sans-Culottes. Episode 80, The Terror Begins, is already available for all members on the True Revolutionary tier. But before then, make sure not to miss the 2 fantastic episode extras for this episode. The first explores the debate as to how we should interpret both these events and the role of the ultraradicals on the 4th and 5th of September. The second is a mini questions and answers episode answering your questions on the Hébertists. However, before you go, a quick reminder that I need your help. If you're enjoying Grey History and you would like to keep enjoying Grey History, then please support the show any way you can. Whether it's telling friends about the podcast or joining the community, there's a range of ways you can keep this revolution on the air. One final welcome to the newest members of the community, and a special shout out again to the heroes of the revolution: Brian, Charles, Jeff, Olga, Kevin R., Scott, Howard, Hilberto, Ron, Kevin S., and Fernando. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your support. Stay safe and have a great day.